How is everyone doing today?
Great.
Great.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here, happy to see you, happy that everyone was able to make it out today to learn more about God, learn more about what He has in store for us, and a little bit more about His plan. As always, in the beginning, want to get those minds working, those gears turning. We're going to start off with a question. Who has an opinion on this subject matter? How do you feel about slavery? I see some thumbs down, some thumbs ups. How do you guys feel about slavery? Tima, how do you feel about slavery? Not good, huh? Slavery usually has some negative connotations to it, right? When we think of slavery, we think of the oppressed, we think very sad people, just like this guy here, just kind of down on his luck, tied to this ball and chain, as they say. Well, how about this question? Are there slaves in the world right now?
Yes.
Yes, there are slaves in the world right now. And then a follow-up question. Do you have any slaves right now?
Why not?
I see a lot of head shakes, shaking no, we don't. And I was one of you up until I did this sermon. I didn't think I had slaves either, and I checked it out. There's a website called slavefootprint.org. And this website actually tracks exactly how many slaves each person has. You type in where you live, you type in your age, you type in what kind of house you have, what kind of cars you drive, what kind of shoes you buy, how many clothes you have hanging in your closet, and they give you a rough estimate of about how many slaves you have. And I'm going to have a confession for you guys right now. This is how much I have working for me. 51, and that's 51 too many, in my opinion. So if you want to find out for yourselves, you can visit this website and see how many slaves you have working for you. And this is an interesting subject that we're going to talk about today because slavery is not a very popular subject. In fact, it's kind of taboo. We don't want to talk about slavery. We don't want to talk about the dark and ugly side of the world. We're in America. We're in the Golden State, on the Golden Coast. There's no slaves here. We don't want to see that. But you know what? If you have any one of these items, you have slaves. And those are just the facts. If you have clothes, if you eat fruit from tropical countries, if you have jewelry, if you have an iPhone, if you wear Nikes, Adidas, any kind of name brand shoes that you didn't make yourself, someone made it for you. And in fact, about 95% of our coffee is harvested by slaves as well. And I got to see this firsthand in Costa Rica. And in Costa Rica, they have a lot of coffee farms, but it isn't the Costa Ricans who are harvesting the coffee. It's actually people migrating from Panama, coming up to Costa Rica and working for pennies to harvest this coffee fruit. And I've seen kids as young as 3 years old helping their parents to perform this kind of task. Just kind of another not so fun fact, there's about 250,000 children that live and work in Pakistani brick kilns, which is those pictures I send out on Viber. Those are the children that's part of this statistic. And that's as much as the whole entire population of Irvine, Baton Rouge, or Orlando. 250,000 children, that's just one country. And that's in 2007. Kind of outdated information. Could be more. Why are we talking about this today? Well, the question is, how come is it like this? How come this subject is even a subject here in what we say in the 21st century? I mean, we should be so much far advanced, this shouldn't even be a subject today, right? Well, some might argue because it's always been this way. If you go back to almost the beginning of humanity, there has existed something like this. What is this? It's not the food pyramid. What is this? Close. This is the societal hierarchy. Hierarchy, right? And no matter what culture, what country, what age and time in history, you will almost always end up with this shape. A pyramid. Very, very tiny at the top, very big at the very bottom. Here we see upper class, upper middle, lower middle, working class, working poor, and then the tiny sliver, the underclass, the unclassifieds. In fact, if you go into the olden times, these weren't even considered as people. They were considered as property. They weren't allowed any kind of social stance. They weren't given a voice. They definitely didn't have free will. They looked like that guy in the beginning who was tied and chained to something. And the fact is, these people still exist to this day. Slavery exists in this physical world. Whether you want to talk about it, don't want to talk about it, think about it, not think about it, doesn't change the facts. Slavery is nothing new. It's literally been like this, like I said, since the existence of humans. But see, we humans have found ways to exhibit superiority amongst other people for a very long time, and we've gotten very good at it. See, now we don't see people dragged off in chains and whipped and beaten to tend to the fields or tend to the animals. Now they're hidden away in factories, far away in other countries with no cameras, no TVs, and they don't just serve their white masters, they serve the entire world. So we've just gotten a lot better at slavery. We've gotten a lot better at commoditizing it to such an extent that we almost don't even know that it exists. What an interesting topic for today. What does this have to do with us? You know, I'm not here to say that slavery is okay or that it's even sanctioned by the Bible. In fact, in Isaiah, where it talks about how to fast, it tells you to loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free. In fact, that's what the Bible calls us to do. So if you knowingly have some slaves, I would highly suggest reading that part. Now, today we're going to look at another form of slavery, not the physical kind. But we have to admit that it exists. The social structure exists. It hasn't gone away. Whether it's from the Egyptian times, all the way back to the Babylonian times, and even farther back than that, that pyramid's always been around. Today we're going to look at another form of slavery, a kind of slavery that isn't locked away in a factory far, far away. It's a slavery that's much, much closer to home. In fact, it could be right in our own home. And we're going to take a look at that. But before we get into the spiritual aspects of slavery, we're going to read a story about an actual slave, an actual servant girl that made her mark in history, that has her story written down in the Holy Scripture. And this is written in 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had a flaw. He had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. Now in this very short snippet, we see something. We see a structure again, and it looks something like this. Here we see at the very bottom an Israelite slave girl. Above her, the wife of the commander of the army, the commander, and then the king. Interestingly enough, that even the commander of one of the biggest armies to occupy the map at that time still had a master, still had someone that he answered to, still had to obey somebody. And we see that this structure here is still respected by all the parties involved in the story. The Israelite slave girl didn't go straight to Naaman, didn't go to the king. She went to the one right above her. And she went to the one right above her. And he went right above him. Naaman, the commander. You would think at this position, well, what kind of master? You've already reached the pinnacle of leadership almost. But yet he still had to answer to the king. So it's a very interesting story. This little girl, just living her life, doing what it is little girls do, playing with dolls, maybe going down to the river, maybe helping her family with the fields, gets kidnapped by bands, bandits, criminals, soldiers. Just grab her, nab her, and take her away from where she is. Take her to a whole different land, whole different culture, whole entirely different societal structure. Whereas at home, she might not have been at the bottom. She might have been in the middle with her family, with her neighbors. And they snatch her away from there. They drag her down to the bottom of the pyramid in a brand new land. Let's see what happens next. So Naaman comes to the king, and the king says, by all means, go. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. They didn't have transfer apps anymore, no Cash App, no Venmo, so he had to bring all the goods with him. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. Now keep in mind, Naaman was part of the land that invaded Israel, and they were the ones who seized a little girl from them. Now the king of that territory is now texting this king and saying, hey, we have a problem. Can you help us solve it? This king is in shock. He's like, I'm the one with the problem. You're invading me. And am I God? How can I even help you with a problem of this size? Then Elijah, there was a certain man named Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes. He sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know there's a prophet in Israel. Very interesting stories being laid out. But again, we see consistency. We see this structure. The king of Aram doesn't stoop down to the servants of another culture, of another land. Yes, he might invade them, he might kidnap a few people, he might even steal their stuff, but he respects the structure. Kings talk with kings, boss to boss, leader to leader. And there is no stooping down, not for the king. But then someone comes up and says, hold on, this structure right here, it's actually incomplete. Yeah, you people might respect it and think it's the right structure, but there's a huge aspect that's missing from it. And now this person is Elisha, who happens to be a prophet. And he shows us there's another kind of structure that inhibits the life we live in. This isn't an actual portrait. It's an artist's rendition. The prophet Elijah didn't need to go up to the ranks. He didn't need to go up to his master, to his master, to his master, all the way to the king. He had direct access to God. And God, as we know, is above everyone, everything, every culture, olden times, new times, now, anything that's here on earth, even the lowly kings needed to answer to God. And we see this across the Old Testament, whether they're heathen kings, even they understood, okay, there's gods, and I have to worship gods. In the Egyptian times, they revered the Pharaoh as a god, but even that Pharaoh worshipped his own heathen gods. And even sometimes in the Old Testament, we see heathen kings asking Israel about their God, because they know their gods are powerless, and God of Israel is actually very powerful. So this was a common knowledge that actually God is even above kings. It doesn't end there. And not only that, they knew that prophets were the one that had direct access to God. Kings did not. Kings were at the top of the pyramid, but they didn't have that antenna that reached all the way up to the heavens. But they knew there were a class of people that did have that. And these people weren't really on the pyramid. There was no place for them. Sometimes they're on top, sometimes they're on the bottom, sometimes they're exiled, sometimes they're killed, sometimes they're respected, and next day they're being hunted. There was no place for prophets in society. They were on their own. But Elijah wasn't the only one. There were many prophets that showed us this relationship between God and societies. We heard about this today in the earlier service with Daniel and Belshazzar. See, no matter how much of a great king Belshazzar thought he was, how proud that he counted himself, how rich he felt, he still was not above God. See, once God decided that his days are numbered down to literally minutes, Belshazzar had no choice but to die. That was literally all he could do, and it was the prophet Daniel that was able to interpret the message, not the king. So even though the king thought he was at the very peak of that pyramid, he still couldn't read the writing on the wall. But the prophet Daniel could, and he interpreted. So prophets, we know, are very close to God. They're right there. They understand when God speaks. And they help us understand, us common folk, or maybe us kings. Prophets help us understand what God's will is. But you know what? That was in the olden times. What about now? In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Today we have a clear understanding of what exactly is the correct hierarchy, and it looks something like this. We have God the Father at the top, who's been, always has been. There is no beginning and end to him, because that would mean there's a construct of time. But he is beyond time. He always has been, always will be. And the Son of God is right underneath him. And the reason why he's right underneath him, because he listens to the Father. He obeys the Father will. Much like Naaman, the commander of the army, yes, he was a commander, a leader, an esteemed position, but he still had the king to answer to. And the Son of God is actually above the entire universe. He created the universe, so of course, logically, he's the master of it. If I create, a little ball of clay, I'm the master of this little ball of clay. It's not going to do anything unless I do something to it. I'm the guy in charge. And if I create a program on the computer, we have some developers out there, you know what I'm talking about. If I create a program on the computer, the program will only do what I program it to do. If I program glitches, it will glitch. If I create it to run perfectly, it will run perfectly. But at no point will the program decide that it's the master of me. Yes, we know we have now artificial intelligence. We say, wow, it's intelligent. It makes its own decisions. But still, someone wrote the artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence will only do what is confined to in its program. Jesus creates the entire universe by the will of his Father. So, logically and masterfully, he is the ruler of it all. So we see this structure. God the Father, God the Son, everything else. Something happens, though. In John 6, we read, Jesus is saying, "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." Jesus does something. He comes down from heaven to earth. He comes down into his creation, down into the program that he wrote. This is a highly unlikely, probably never happened kind of situation in the history of our time. In our earlier service, we talked about the royal family, right? We talked about the privilege they have, the different aspects of their lifestyle. They don't need ID, they don't pay taxes, and they definitely don't come down from their big castle to live at some countryside barn and have kids in the stables next to the animals. They definitely have never done that, and they probably still won't. But that's exactly what happened. God comes down into the earth, not boss to boss, not king to king, master to servant. He totally flips this hierarchy upside down. The way that people have been used to their whole lives, now it's no longer a thing. It doesn't happen. Jesus flips it. What was the purpose of this mission? Why does Jesus come down from his royal place in the kingdom of heaven? What was the purpose? We read in Matthew. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, this is a very loaded place that I'm sure we still cannot fully, truly understand. The master of the entire universe steps down to what? Make everyone bow down to him? To make everyone serve him? To make everyone obey him? No, he comes to serve. That seems very counterintuitive, like we talked about with the royal family. Imagine Queen Elizabeth comes into your house and she's like, hey, let me do the dishes. Let me clean your house. I'll scrub the toilets. I'll take out the trash. I'll do everything. She doesn't even have an ID because everyone knows who she is. She's not coming into your house to clean anything. She has a person to squeeze out her toothpaste. She doesn't even do that. But here we read, Son of Man came down to serve. And not just to clean house, but to give his life as a ransom for many. Here's a question. What is a ransom? It's a question to the crowd. You can answer.
Payment?
A fee?
It's a payment?
Oh, payment? Okay. What kind of payment? It's a rent check?
A payment for a slave. A
A rain
rain check.
check. What is a ransom? At what point do we see ransoms?
When somebody kidnaps.
When somebody kidnaps. And a kidnapper usually sends this kind of note. Pay up or else. And he's going to write it, cut out little letters from the newspaper, make sure he can't get tracked. And this has been done many, many times. Ransoms are usually written out during kidnappings. When people get kidnapped, the kidnapper wants some kind of reward for the kidnappee in order to get that kidnapped individual back to where he came from. For their hard work of relocating that person. Travel fee. And usually, depending on the status of that person, that usually determines the price. I mean, if I get kidnapped, I don't know, $100, $200, the prince gets kidnapped, a couple $1 million, billion maybe. So your status really determines the kind of payment that the kidnapper will ask for. Nobody writes a ransom for $50, $100. Nobody steals or kidnaps someone that's not really worthy. But here we read that Jesus stepped down. Okay, we have to understand, this is not just a step. I don't step downstairs. He stepped down from heaven into his creation. If I wrote a program, right, and it started glitching, if I could somehow go into the computer, get into the code, into the binary, and start doing something there as a binary digit, that's kind of the closest, interpretation I could come up. So it's not just stepping down. It's not even like that story of Prince and the Pauper, right? Like, oh, hey, we look alike, let's change clothes. I'll be the pauper, you be the prince. I'll step down into pauper level. No, he didn't just change his clothes. He changed his whole identity from son of God into son of man.
Nature.
His whole nature changed, yeah. Why did we need to be ransomed?
Because we ran away.
Where did we run away to? Who kidnapped us? Do we have any recollection of being kidnapped in our life? Probably not. But here we read facts. Jesus did something, and he did it for a reason. One, to obey his Father, and two, that mission was to pay a fee, a ransom. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And the people he were talking to, they were believers, right? Because he was saying to the Jews who had believed him, like, wait a second, set me free? "Oh, we are offspring of Abraham," they answered him, "and have never been enslaved. We have no recollection of slavery. We have no recollection of chains, of being kidnapped, none of that. How is it that you say you will become free?" Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." These were believers who believed Jesus, followed him in John chapter 8. And they didn't understand. What are you talking about, set us free? We followed the law. We went to church. We dressed modestly. We did the practices. We kept the Sabbath. We did everything we're supposed to do. No one invaded us. We are not in a strange land. We are not serving some strange masters. We are free. Look at our lives. Much how we can look into our lives right now and say, when I told you at the beginning that you have slaves, and some of you are like, "Oh, I don't have any slaves." You do. You just don't know about, but they're out there. And they're getting paid nothing for nothing in horrible conditions. So just because we don't feel a certain way, or just because we're not thinking about certain things, doesn't excuse that it's a fact. And Jesus here is telling them facts. If you practice sin, you're a slave to sin. So why did Jesus step down, the master of the universe, step down from his position down to earth and pay that ransom? Because we were slaves to sin. We were kidnapped by sin, and we were trapped there. And the only way to pull us out was there had to have been a ransom. And that ransom wasn't gold, wasn't silver, wasn't any kind of bank transfer. It was the life of Jesus, the Son of God. Or your life. And you still wouldn't be set free. You would just pay the penalty. You would just be punished. And that'd be the end of that. So Jesus did something super phenomenal that's never been recorded by anybody else in any kind of way. Step down from the highest position, one of the highest positions there ever is, just besides Father God, into earth, and does something completely unimaginable. Pays the ransom for many. Question of the day, why? Why did he do this? Here we see that there's a different kind of societal structure. People are slaves to sin, and they obeyed whatever sin told them to do. They didn't have a choice. Much like we saw before in the other pyramids, you obeyed the one right up top. You don't tell your boss what to do. Your boss tells you what to do. And for many, many people, sin was their boss. Whatever sin told them to do, they did it. No questions asked. No thinking about it. No, like, hey, are you sure you want it? No, they just went and obeyed. And then Jesus did something. He came down to earth, paid the ransom, gave us the truth. The truth set us free, gave his life, traded it for ours. So what happens next? Do we just roam free and just like wait to be kidnapped again? Do we just kind of like, okay, well, I'm free. I guess I'm just going to go run and then whoop, back into another captive. You know, usually when the kidnapped family's person pays the ransom, the criminals bring him back to the family. They bring him back. They don't just like, okay, well, I guess we're going to dump you somewhere. No, they usually arrange for a way for the family to get that person back. But you know what? Here's what we often associate with slavery. Forced. When the little Israelite girl was kidnapped, she didn't have a choice. And in the olden times, if you look at any instance of slavery, those people had no choice. When Joseph was sold into slavery, he didn't have a choice. He could not prove that he was a free man. He could argue all he would have wanted. That wouldn't have helped his case. He had no choice. But the Bible tells us something different when it comes to this kind of structure. Romans 6, we read, "Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey? Whether you are slaves to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness." It turns out that we didn't just get kidnapped. We came to the kidnapper and said, "Okay, here I am. Tie my hands and then do with me whatever you please." Here Paul says, you offer yourselves as obedient slaves, whether to sin, and then sin does whatever with you that it wants, or to righteousness. I call this position willing slavery. It's willingly that people submit themselves to slavery, whether to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness. But that was now, in this grace period. Before Jesus came down, people didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice between obedience to God. They didn't have a choice to be set free. They were always slaves to sin. And the people who were very strong in their faith were able to somehow overpower it, maneuver, wrestle it in a way, shape, or form that could somehow give them the ability to serve God through their faith. Abraham was called righteous through his faith. But now, you see people willingly submit themselves to this master, sin. But that is why Jesus stepped down. The whole reason why he did all of that was to give you a choice, another choice, not to submit yourselves to sin, but a new kind of master. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. Just as you used to offer yourselves as slaves to impurity and ever-increasing wickedness, so now offer yourselves as slaves to righteousness, leading to holiness. When you were slaves to sin, you were free from the control of righteousness. It could not control you. What benefit did you reap at that time from the things you're now ashamed of? Those things result in death. But now you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God. The benefit you reap leads to holiness, and the result is eternal life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. See, here's something that I want to submit to you guys. A created thing, object, or person could not have a master. If I create something, I'm the master of that no matter what. We are obviously all creation. So we need to have a master. We need to. And we only have these two options. We either have sin or we have God. And here in Romans it says, Jesus has done everything possible to set you free from one master so that you can choose to be slave to another master. But there is no in between. You're either a slave or you're a slave. You're either a slave or you're a slave. Many people out there think that now we have been set free, that means we're free to do whatever we want. We're free. If a person escapes from prison, he thinks, well, hey, I'm free now. I could run away, start a new life, go down to Mexico, do what I want. Until he's caught and then sent back to prison for longer, for escaping. We people can only have two positions. We can either be a slave or we can be a slave. And the sooner we humble ourselves to this information, to this knowledge, the sooner we can make the right decision. There is no such thing as I'm in control. We've heard this, my body, my choice. We've heard that before, right? Where's that coming from? They don't know about this. They're misinformed. They think there's a third master, which is yourself. And we'll get to that. But if I tell this to people, hey, who are you a slave of? And from one slave to another, who are you a slave of? They say, well, wait a second, slave. What about free will? Didn't God give us free will? Can we do whatever we want to? Can't we have the position of my body, my choice? And I say, yeah, free will to choose what master you serve. That's it. There's your free will. You can make the choice to serve whomever you want. The Israelite girl did not have that choice. She was taken away from one land, dropped into another, and said, hey, serve this lady, or it's not looking good for you. She didn't have a choice. But now we people in this time, in this what's called a grace period, have a choice, a free will to choose what master we serve. And those same people who say, hey, I'm not a slave, I'm the one in control, believe in this. Does anyone know what this is? It's not the walk of faith. What is this?
Walk of shame.
From the back. Evolution. Yes, I'm sure you've seen this more than once. I called it the evidence for lack of accountability. Here's the evidence. If you don't want to be accountable, if you don't want to be responsible, this is all the evidence you need. You don't have to do anything because you have free will. You're not a creation. You're just a thing made by accident. You're just some atoms, some particles, some chemicals, some molecules. Do whatever you want. There is no structure. There is no hierarchy. And I say this, these people who, believe in this, and they say, the only real standard you should conform to, or the real standard that you should compare yourselves to, is to who you were yesterday. If you're better than who you were yesterday, then you're on the right track. So if you, for example, lied 100 times, but today you lied 99 times, then hey, you're doing better. Keep going. Maybe tomorrow you'll only lie 98 times. But these people have no sense of morality, no sense of values because of this. This is not a pyramid. This is, I don't know what that is. It's a zoo, really is what it is. I believe in evolution, though. I do. I do think we all need to evolve. Almost exactly like this. See, in this picture that we see, the thing at the end looks nothing like the thing in the beginning, right? I don't know what happened in the middle, but we see for sure that if we compare that last image to the first image, there's nothing alike. And I believe in that kind of evolution. And it looks something like this. We're all born and we all are beautiful. We're all babies, smooth skins, nice little tuft of hair. And then immediately we go into slavery. Immediately. We do that first sin, that first choice, that first unwise decision, that first lie, that first selfish desire, and immediately we make the decision of who our master is. And it's not by choice. We have this sin in us. It's in our DNA. It's ingrained to make us choose the wrong thing every single time. And babies don't even need to go to church to learn what something is bad or something's good. Internally they know. And they will choose the bad. And then that person dies. Every single time. And for many people, the evolution stops there. It stops right at that third step. Starts with the baby, ends with the tombstone. That's it. But we people believe in what Jesus did. He paid the ransom for many. And we say, hold on, something happened there after the tombstone. Jesus did something. He paid a certain kind of price. He stepped down from his position down to earth, paid the ransom with his life to pull us out of that tombstone. Pull us out of that ball and chain, out of that prison, and into something else. But if you notice, in the next stages, those people are definitely not by themselves. They are no longer chained to a black ball that's going to drag him down to the depths. Now they're carrying the cross. Now they're slaves to God. Before they were slaves to sin, now they're slaves to obedience, which leads to righteousness. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." If you look at this picture, look at the second image, look at the last image. Which burden do you want to have? And then let me ask you this, which burden are you used to? Because many of us, I'm sure, know what that second picture looks like. We know the weight of that ball. We know how it feels. We remember the sounds of those chains dragging across the floor. We remember. We were there, all of us. Then you look at the guy at the very end. Yeah, he has something strapped to his back. And you know what? Sometimes when he's walking, it's hitting the back of his head. You know, and he's sitting down, it's like making his back all straight. It's there. It should be there. But Jesus says, you know, it's nothing like that ball from before. It's nothing like the chains you were used to. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. I know the word yoke, you know, this isn't like the egg yolk. It's a different kind of yoke. In these modern times, we probably have never even seen one in our lives. So what is a yoke? And a yoke is something that's put on oxen. Specifically 2 of them. One is your, let's say your left axle, one is your right axle, right? And the yoke is used as a steering wheel or steering kind of tool to help guide these oxen to the right way. So what Jesus is saying is, this was what I need you to look like. You are still slaves. You cannot be in the middle. You're either a slave to sin or slave to righteousness. But I want you to be my slave. And guess what? The slavery is nothing like the slavery you were used to before. It's easy. It's light. There is no burden. Jesus wants to be in control. But you know, to be in this position, these oxen, they have to feel the steering. They have to feel when they're being pulled left, and they have to feel when they're being pulled right. Oh, they have free will. They do. These oxen do have free will, but they submitted it. They sacrificed it and said, you know what? I'm going to deny my free will right now and let the guy in charge steer me, because he knows where to go. I don't. I don't know where to go. And that's why Jesus says, take my yoke upon me. He's not saying, I am shoving my yoke down your throats, swallow it. He's not saying that. He's saying, take it. I'm offering it. It's up to you. You do have free will to choose what master you serve. And you know, these oxen, they have to know the rider. They have to. They have to be able to understand when they're being pulled left and understand when they're being pulled right. So how many of us out there have this question? I wonder what God's will is. I wonder what his will is for me. I wonder if he needs me to go left today or maybe to go right tomorrow. How many of us deeply actually ask this question and wait for an answer? In Romans 12:2, we read, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Here's what a lot of people out there look like. They still have a yoke. They're still being steered by the world, by the prince of this world, by sin, who's turning them left and they're eagerly going left. And you know what? If you're in this position, you will never know what God's will is. Never. If you're conforming and you're willingly every morning you wake up and say, yoke of the world or the cross? I think I'm going to go put on the yoke of the world. Yeah, it's a little heavier. Yeah, it drags the ground as I walk, but I like it. It's body fitting, right? It conforms to my structure. It fits so naturally. I'm so used to it. I've had it my whole life. Why would I choose something else? And if you're in this group of people, you will not be able to approve what God's will is, because you have the wrong guy steering. These ox, sorry. Conforming to the pattern of this world. What does that look like? You know, it looks like not like being a slave. It looks like being free. It looks like whatever you desire. That's what it looks like on the outside. When you look across, the world and you see people just living their lives, that's what this looks like. It does not look like slavery. It looks like your body, your choice. A lot of people did live like that in the beginning of times. After Adam, after Eve, people multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And you know what they did? Literally whatever they wanted. They ate, they drank, they partied, they married, they had families. Not all of them were out there killing people, pillaging, plundering, and destroying one another. No. Some people, all they did was conform to the patterns of the world. That's it. And God looked at his creation and with deep regret said, you know what? I think I might have made a mistake. I think that I should probably wipe it all clean. But except for Noah and his family, he didn't. There was one righteous family that was found in the trillions of people that lived. Literally, look it up. Trillions of people. One family didn't do this. Just one family. And because of that one family, we are still around. Those people didn't make it. They drowned. They died. And they're not around. But what if you're like, you know what? I get this. I've been through this. I put on the cross every morning when I wake up, and I still have it on me when I go to sleep. I meditate day and night, and I do discern what the will of God is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I do that. This doesn't apply to me. Okay, well, let's talk about you too then. Question to the crowd, who identifies as a leader? Show of hands. We have one leader. Two. Guy up front. And it's okay if you identify as a leader.
The leader up front.
The leader up front. The believer, right? It's okay if you identify as a leader. God made some of us leaders. But who identifies as a follower? We have some people who are leaders and followers. That's good. Because sometimes you do need to show and exhibit both. So we understand, right? We know a person who's a leader. He leads maybe with his ideologies or maybe with his own behavior and his actions, and he shows people what's the right thing to do. Or maybe he's a bad leader, shows what not to do. Do as I say, not do as I do. But we know one of the best examples of leaders out there. Right? It's Jesus Christ. Telling you again, from the top of the top of the top, the boss of the bosses, the king of all the kings, this Son of God showed us what it's like to be a leader. In John 13 we read, when he, Jesus, had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Lord means master, right? We have a land lord, that means that's the master of the land we live in. So Lord as in master. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is the messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. very powerful place. The creator of the universe, master of everything, doesn't just step down and say, okay, where's my throne at? Where's my Hummer limousine at? Take me to the nearest castle. He says, put me under your feet and I will wash them free. The amount of servitude and humility the Lord, the teacher, showed in this, and says, now go do as I do. He wanted to make sure, back in those days especially, this ritual was done on two different occasions. One, when you were expecting guests into your home, and you said, hey, as a sign of my hospitality, you traveled far, your feet are dirty, we don't have enough water for you to take a shower, but I will wash your feet for you. And this was a way that they showed hospitality. And another was right before you went to bed, and you were kind of getting ready to go to bed, you locked your door, you turned all the candles off, you had a basin by your bed, you washed your feet, because again, they didn't have enough water to take showers. You washed your feet, you went to bed. And after you did that process, you were not expecting any more visitors, you did not open the door for anyone else. So Jesus here has shown his position. And he's shown, I'm the Lord, I'm the teacher, I'm the master, I'm the creator. Yes, I'm all of these things. Look how I lead you. I not only wash you with my words, with my teachings, I'm not only going to purify all of your sins and make you a completely new person, completely new being, I'm also going to wash your feet. I'm going to make sure your paths are clean. That where you go, that you're going to go in the right way. That I'm going to lead you there with my yoke, the burden that is light. So whether you're a leader or a follower, this is for you. The leader on the left, most of us know. He's at the top of the pyramid. He's the pharaoh, he's the king, he's the president, he's the CEO, he's the boss. And he only talks boss to boss. He doesn't step down from his position. And he tells the people at the bottom whether it's okay, whether they can do whatever they ask him, or he'll tell them no. It's totally up to him. The royal family, as we heard today, they get to decide. Oh yeah, sure, let's make that a law. No, I don't think that should be a law. And then there's this theme, right? Servant leadership. It's an oxymoron. It's a paradox. How can you be a servant, a slave, and a leader at the same time? That's impossible. That doesn't fit the structure of a pyramid. That's exactly what Jesus did. He stepped down. And he paid a ransom to lift us up out of the muck, out of the dirt, out of this world that so many people are conforming to the patterns of, and lift us out of it. And only he could have been the one to do that. Only he had the power and the bank account to pay that ransom. Nobody else could have. Much like this servant girl. She was captive. She was stolen from a whole new land, taken to another land, to what? To serve Naaman's wife. She was a free girl living her own free life, probably without a care in the world. And she was taken. Taken for what? To be set free? To go have no cares in the world in another place? No, to serve. That was her job. Why did God pay the ransom and set us free from sin? So we would stop serving ourselves. Let's think about that. How many of us wake up in the morning and think, what do I want to do today? What do I need? Let's check the fridge. Okay, not enough Coca-Cola, gotta get some more. All right, man, it's just infinity out there. Well, maybe Ferrari one day. These clothes are kind of outdated, just got them last month, maybe already outdated, need something more. How many of our actions are driven by our own personal desires because we're still slaves? And we still feel like we need to serve. We don't know who to serve. Well, who's the easiest person to serve? The guy in the mirror. He's always there, so I'm going to serve him. And that's conforming to the patterns of the world. It is God's will for us to serve him and to serve others. how can we wash each other's feet? What are feet needed for? For walking, for getting somewhere. For shoes. Fair trade shoes. Let's go back to that servant girl. What was her job? To serve, right? To serve Naaman's wife? She did do that. You know how? She saved Naaman's life. Let's put it that way. She had information, she had knowledge that, hold on, there's a prophet back in my hometown where you guys kidnapped me from. There was a prophet there, and he had direct access to God. And if only my master was to go there, he would be spared, saved, healed, and he would not have leprosy anymore. She took her job title as servant to the very peak. She served the best way she knew how, with her righteous information. Let's put it that way. She knew where Naaman needed to walk to. She showed him the path. She showed him the address, and even though, he didn't quite get there at first, kind of went his own route, she instructed him and she told him where to go. How many of us do we see people out there with dirty feet? We have our lives figured out. No, world, we know that's black, this is white. I'm not even looking out into there. I'm in my, very sanctified, very just structural kind of built place, and everything is just sanitized here and clean and pure. But what about the others whose feet are so dirty you can't even see where one toe starts and another one ends? What do we do with them? Do we take this information, the water that Jesus gave us, and say, you know what? I might look down, right? Because I'm so righteous and I'm up here on my pedestal, and you're down there as a sinner. Do we take that approach, or do we say, because I'm righteous, because I've been set free, because I know where I come from, because I've been in that land before, let me now get down below under you and serve you? Jesus showed it best. And he said, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. You know these things. Not your first day at church, not your first day reading the Bible. You know these things. You'll be blessed if you do them. As we see here, very modern approach. Jeans,
Shoes.
No, I got the leather cowboy boots in the back.
Kind of don't really need them.
But you know what? Like I said, two different moments when this happened. One is when you accept guests. Second one, before you go to bed. 9 times out of 10, this was a job for servants and slaves. They did it. The slaves did it. Definitely not the owner of his castle. No way. The slaves did them. And Jesus showed that I'm literally your creator, but I'm taking a slave status right now. A servant status. Born in a barnyard with donkeys and sheep and chickens running around and just totally out there in the countryside. I could have had the most white marble palace you could have ever imagined, but I didn't. Because I want to show you how to lead, how to serve. Let's think about this as we enter this new week. Washing feet. We know a lot, and we've been set free. We know what Jesus did for us. We just celebrated, Passover and Easter. We know that we died with Christ. We resurrected with him. Good. Now that you know these things, go do them and you'll be blessed. Go teach others. Make their path straight. Show them by example, not with your words. Jesus said with our words. Many people didn't hear. Many people didn't listen. And he showed it to his disciples. They still didn't quite get it. He's like, you will understand. You will. But you know this. Now do it. We will summarize and wrap up. In the beginning, we heard that sin is powerless. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. He's no longer in control. He's nobody. The battle has been won. The war has ended. We're victorious. We don't need to take that yoke anymore. And if we do take it, it's by choice. The way we choose to serve a master people can choose to still serve sin, even though it's powerless. That's like serving, I don't know, a cockroach in your house. Completely just thing you should just step on and crush out. Like, no, I'm going to serve you. Your will. Sin is powerless. God has decided that all that belongs to your earthly nature deserves death. God made this decision. Literally everything in your earthly nature deserves to die. Much like the inhabitants of Jericho deserve to die. Much like every city in the promised land that stood as an obstacle to Israel deserved to die. Much like everything in your earthly nature. It's not our decision. It's not something that we just all of a sudden got together and decided, okay, I think that, these several groups of actions just need to not be around anymore, and that's what we'll call morals. That's what we'll call values. No. God made a decision that earthly nature deserves death. And that's why he says, put to death everything that belongs to your earthly nature. Everything. Everyone born of God overcomes the world. If you went through that second evolutionary cycle, not the first one, because that doesn't exist. If you went through that second evolutionary cycle and you went through the tombstone, went through the cross, went through the resurrection on the third day, then you overcome the world. You can literally not choose the world anymore. That's why Jesus did what he did. We are victorious under God's authority. He decided it to be so. Much like Naaman the commander didn't go to battle unless the king told him to. He couldn't even go to the king of Israel unless his king allowed him to. He was subject to his master's commands. And no matter, I know we're not at the bottom of the pyramid. We're not slaves. We don't see slaves. We think, middle class, upper middle class, we're North America, not South America. We have our own sort of societal structures and we think, yeah, we're at the top. We're not. We need to do things under someone's authority. And under God's authority, he proclaimed us to be victorious. Last but not least, we've been set free from sin to be slaves. It sounds like a paradox. I'm set free to be a slave. Yes, that's exactly it, because we're a creation. There cannot be another way. Why did this happen? Why did God do this? Why did Jesus pay the ransom? So that we can serve him and serve others. When that little Israelite girl was captured, she wasn't just captured and then thrown away. She had a purpose to serve. That's why they went into the territory. That's why they kidnapped her. That's why they took her. They brought her into the commander's house so she can then bring good to the family. And she did that. She saved the life of her master. And it is my will and my hope that everyone looks like this. We've been set free so that we can be slaves to God. Amen.
Amen.